The Hollow Eyes Chapter 1. The watcher in the window. Hannah had always believed in the quiet safety of her suburban neighborhood. Nestled in the outskirts of the city, the houses stood in neat rows, their perfectly trimmed lawns like something out of a picture book. There was never any real danger here, at least, that's what she thought. But then the house across the street had changed. It had been abandoned for as long as she could remember. The pale blue paint was peeling, the front door rotted and warped by years of neglect. No one had ever lived there since she moved in 5 years ago, and the occasional passerby would simply glance at it with a mix of curiosity and discomfort before moving on. Hannah never thought much of it. But a few weeks ago, she noticed the windows. It started with just one, the one on the second floor, on the far right side of the house. She hadn't noticed it before. There was a strange kind of darkness inside, like the curtains hadn't been drawn in years. She found herself looking at it more often than she should. Every morning, when she left for work, it was the first thing she saw. Every evening, as she pulled into her driveway, it was still there. The window. Watching. At first, she convinced herself that it was just the shadows playing tricks on her. The house was old, after all. But as the days passed, something about it made her uneasy. The feeling of being observed grew stronger, more persistent. One evening, she decided to do something about it. After dinner, she grabbed her coat and stepped outside, the cold air biting at her skin. The house across the street loomed in the fading light of dusk, its decaying structure looking even more sinister now that the sun was setting. She walked closer, past the overgrown bushes and the neglected garden. The window. The dark shape. She felt a strange compulsion to look up, and when she did, her stomach tightened. For the briefest moment, she swore she saw something, or someone. Standing there in the window. Tall, thin, almost featureless. Their face was obscured by shadows, but their eyes. Those hollow eyes. Empty, like black pits, staring right through her. Hannah froze, her breath caught in her throat. She blinked, but when her eyes refocused, the window was empty again. The house was still, silent. She swallowed hard, her mind racing with questions. Had she imagined it? She had to have. The house was abandoned, after all. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was watching her. The next day, the sensation was even worse. As she sat at her kitchen table, sipping her morning coffee, she couldn't help but glance out the window, toward the house across the street. She caught sight of the second-floor window again. There was nothing there, but she felt it. The presence. The watchful eyes. That evening, she decided to go over and investigate. It wasn't like her to be reckless, but the tension gnawing at her was unbearable. She had to know what was going on with that house, with that window. She had to see for herself. Hannah walked across the street, her footsteps echoing in the quiet, almost too still air. She stood at the gate, looking up at the house. The window on the second floor was now dark, but she couldn't shake the eerie feeling that something was waiting for her. She pushed open the creaky gate, the rusted hinges protesting with a screech. The door was partially ajar, the old wood warped and swollen with age. It hadn't been locked. Without thinking, she stepped inside. The air smelled musty, like dust and mold. The wooden floorboards creaked under her feet as she moved through the entryway. Every corner of the house felt abandoned, forgotten. She passed through the living room, the wallpaper peeling, furniture left behind in disarray, as if the owners had simply disappeared. But the upstairs. The second floor. That window. She had to see it up close. Hannah climbed the stairs slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. The air was colder here, and the silence was suffocating. As she reached the top, she hesitated. The hallway stretched out before her, dimly lit by the fading light from the single window at the end of the hall. But it was the door on the right, the one closest to the window, that drew her attention. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness peeking through the crack. She pushed it open, the hinges creaking in protest. And there it was. The window. It was larger up close, the glass dirty, cracked in places. And outside, nothing. Just the dark sky and the empty street. But as her eyes adjusted to the dimness, she saw something else. A shape. A figure, standing just out of view. Tall. Thin. Inhumanly thin. She blinked, heart hammering in her chest. She couldn't look away. The figure was standing at the far end of the room, obscured by the shadows. It wasn't a person. It couldn't be. The air turned frigid. And then, it moved. The figure darted from the corner, faster than she could process, and in an instant, it was standing directly in front of her. Its face was a twisted mask of darkness, its hollow eyes staring into hers, empty voids sucking in all light, all warmth. Hannah gasped, stepping backward, her pulse racing. She turned to run, but the door slammed shut behind her, trapping her inside. Panic surged in her chest as she clawed at the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. Her breath came in sharp gasps, the room growing colder by the second. From the shadows, the figure spoke, its voice hollow and distorted. "Now you see me." Her scream echoed in the empty house. When the neighbors found Hannah's car still parked outside the abandoned house the next morning, they assumed she had just gotten lost, maybe wandered off in a panic. They didn't know the truth. They didn't know that Hannah was no longer the one looking out of the window. It was something else. And it was watching. Thanks for listening to the story. If you like it, please give the channel a like and a subscribe. Thank you.